In this video, I'm going to show you how you can build a powerful keyboard and tracks rig using Ableton Live. I'm gonna go step by step to help you implement your keyboard rig into your click and tracks rig for a super powerful all-in-one Ableton rig. That was a lot of rig. Let me just start by saying that this is my favorite way thus far to set up my keyboard rig. This rig keeps my keyboard sounds and my tracks all in one place and one ecosystem, which just keeps things simpler and more minimal. It sounds fantastic, and because it's in Ableton, I can actually automate all of my sound changes natively and quickly. This rig is simple, and I'm honestly using it at maybe 3% of its potential. But that's the beauty of this rig, is that because of Ableton automation, the options are pretty much limitless on how you can control your keyboard sound. So we'll start with a gear and software breakdown, because there are a few things that you'll need in order to make this rig work. Then we'll go over the basic piano sound, individual song sounds, and automation. And then finally, I'll show you how it all comes together in a worship set for both piano and tracks to be played from Ableton Live. Enough of me talking, let's start with the gear and software. To reliably run this system, you'll want a Mac or a PC with a minimum of 8 gigabytes of memory, but I would recommend 16 gigabytes of memory. It is possible to run this with only 4 gigabytes of RAM, but you're just asking for trouble, because you are going to be running live backing tracks and then playing piano all from one computer and one setup. You're gonna want a beefy computer. You'll also need a MIDI keyboard. I use the Novation Launch Key 61, and that's what we'll be using for this video. And you'll also need a way to output audio from Ableton. We use the Dante network with our setup, but you can use an audio interface as long as it has a minimum of 6 outputs, and then this system will work well. The next thing you'll need to set this up is the standard version of Ableton Live. And if you're not already running click and tracks through Ableton, be sure to check out Worship Leader School, where we have online coaching and training to help you implement Ableton and so much more. So click the link in the description to apply today if you are interested. Now, this rig is the most practical when it is combined with Ableton backing tracks. So if you just want to build a keyboard rig, we have videos on how you can do that more effectively using MainStage or Ableton on its own. But assuming that you are running a click and tracks, the next thing you'll want to do is get Sunday keys for Ableton. Ableton does have some really great built-in piano sounds, but Sunday keys just makes it really easy to plug and play. Instead of building a piano sound from the ground up, we'll just use something that's already made for worship sounds. But that is all the gear and software that we need to get this running. So let's dive into the setup. This rig works in 2 ways. I have a basic layered worship piano that I use for the majority of the worship songs that I play. Then for the songs that have sound changes, or maybe the lead piano is a synth, then I create custom sounds for those songs. Just like it takes time to initially build out individual song sessions in Ableton, it takes time to design these piano sounds, but what's awesome is that you do it once and then you never have to do it again. Every time I drag a song session into a worship set list, my custom piano sounds are ready to go. And maybe you're not trying to play custom sounds, or you just don't really want to play synth parts, then this basic worship piano sound will get you by. No problem. So in an empty Ableton session, I made 3 MIDI tracks. The first track houses a Sunday keys worship piano that gets panned all the way to the left. The second track houses an exact copy of this first track, but panned to the left. Then the third track is an auxiliary slot that I use to make the piano sound a little more full. So without any panning, I add a huge reverb and delay to this piano, and then turn down the track's volume to tuck it under the mix. Individually, they're gonna sound like this. And together, sounds like this. Then I smack Command+G to group the tracks, and then you'll smack that like button and then rename them. Then I'll slap some reverb and delay functions on the group that I can map to knobs on my keyboard so that I can control reverb and delay on the fly live. Then you're gonna wanna open up an Ableton worship set, copy or drag the piano sounds in, and boom, you have a working basic worship piano. Just make sure you arm your tracks and set your outputs. But maybe this isn't enough for you. Maybe you want a little bit more than basic piano, and I like your motivation. I have two examples for you. Awake My Soul and On Earth as in Heaven. Awake My Soul just uses normal piano, but there is a tone phase change that happens right after the intro, and then the piano stays consistent the rest of the song. So this is where Ableton's functionality starts to get a little crazy. In Awake My Soul's individual Ableton session, I'll copy those piano sounds that we made before, and then I'll open my automation lanes with the automation button. Sunday Sounds piano sounds come in a rack that has macro functions. So think of a rack like a pedal board or a signal flow. Signal comes into the rack, it will go through all of the rack's parameters and effects. So these tone and strength macro buttons control a simple EQ. If I bring strength and tone all the way down, it's gonna sound like this. So I automate that change in Ableton by selecting the right function on the track and then drawing my automation where I need it to go. Since the tone change happens right on the downbeat of the verse, I'll make the tone and strength drop right there. Then I'll have them slowly fade back up over time, so when the downbeat of the chorus hits and all the other instruments drop out, the piano will sound super strong and in charge. Then all you have to do to capture this automation is to create an empty MIDI track on your arrangement. All this track is simply doing is it serves as a place for our automation to be contained. If you don't put a track down, your automation won't move with the rest of the song once you put it in your worship set list. And then maybe we need some synth sounds. Why not? On Earth as in Heaven has a heavy synth lead right in the intro. So using some more Sunday Keys preset sounds, I'm telling you, it's a lot easier if you do it this way. Let's design our keyboard patch. In the individual song session, I'll create 4 new MIDI tracks. I'll drag a lead synth into the first track. I like the uni synth. Then I'll drag that same one onto track 2 and mess with some reverb and delay settings to make it sound a little more full. Then we need a synth bass and an arpeggiated synth. I'll drag the slide bass onto the 3rd track. That one sounds nice. And the SK ARP onto the 4th track. Then I'll arm my tracks and play it. And what do you know? It sounds horrible. I'll quickly add a pitch effect by searching pitch in my browser and then dragging it onto both the bass and the ARP tracks so that I can control where these sounds are triggered on the keyboard. The pitch effects lets you define a low key to use, and how many semitones above that key will also be triggered by a MIDI note. So I'll set my bass semitones at 62 so that the bass will stop being triggered at D3, and I'll add a low note cutoff to my ARP to G3 so that the notes below G3 will not be triggered. And that should separate those sounds enough, and it's going to sound like this. That's pretty good. The last thing to do before this song is ready is to automate devices on and off. So if you plan to use this Ableton keyboard rig, whether or not you build fancy sounds like the ones we just did, you are going to want to get familiar with automating devices on and off. So since my synths need to cut off after the intro to this song, I'll automate all my synth devices off on the downbeat of the verse. And it's as simple as turning automation on, selecting the rack, device, and then drawing the device off. All that's left once that verse hits is going to be my bass and piano sounds. So I'll quickly add empty tracks to these MIDI channels to save this automation. So now let's bring it all together into a worship set, and then you can really see how powerful this rig is when combined with tracks. This is a fully built set list using the songs that we just made. So the first thing to do once all your songs are in is to group all of your piano tracks into one group, selecting them with Command and then pressing Command G to group them. This allows you to treat your piano sounds almost like just another backing track. And it also makes it easy to send all of the tracks into one output since they are going to be in the same bus. So I'll select external output since the master is used for our tracks output, and I'll select stereo outputs 5 and 6 since that's how we have our Dante audio configured. You would want to select audio outputs based on your personal audio configuration. Then you're going to open your automation lanes and you just automate individual tracks on and off using device automation so that only the tracks you want during a certain song are on. Then make sure all of your piano tracks are armed by clicking the little arm button and that your outputs are selected, and boom, you could be the whole worship team with your fully functional keyboard and tracks rig. So now when my playhead is positioned in this song, it plays this sound. But if I go to this song, it's going to play these sounds. And all of this happens live with the click and tracks.
1, 2, 3. 3, 4. Intro 2, 3, 4.
Now, when I say that I love this setup, that might be a bit of an understatement. I really love this setup. My favorite part, too, is that since the Novation launch key integrates with Ableton, I actually cue all of my songs from the keyboard too. So even though designing the sounds can take some time, I find that playing on Sunday is a lot simpler and it's just more minimal. I have one keyboard and one software to worry about. Nothing else. And I know I've only shown you 2 examples of songs to demonstrate this keyboard rig, but because you can automate practically any parameter in Ableton Live, if you're willing to put in the time, you really could have studio keyboard sounds playing live for worship. Now, this whole setup may seem a bit overwhelming for you, and that's okay. It took me longer than I care to admit to figure all this out, and I know it's not a perfect system, but if you want to implement Ableton Live into your worship ministry, then you should check out Worship Leader School, where we have personal coaching and hours of online training to help you build a thriving worship ministry. So click that link in the description to learn more and apply today. Sadly, we have reached the end of the video, and really there's not much more to it. I showed you how to build a keyboard and track rig on one computer at the same time. We learned a lot of cool things today. And if you have any ideas on how this setup could be improved, feel free to drop them below. And if you have a different keyboard rig or track setup, tell us about it. We love learning and hearing from you guys. And please, if you liked this video, but you don't leave a like, I'm going to have to take away your keyboard privileges and you're going to be grounded for the rest of the week. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.